Now, okay, now, cool. All right, so welcome to the second official episode of the Think Tank. This is pretty awesome that it's happening. It's sort of, I like to think of it as a live stage that is just virtual instead of real life. You know, we have people in on the mic here, and so it's, you know, eventually we might get some video going, but as of right now, we don't have that going on. So I will say this time, a couple changes. We someone's mentioning that it's a slow text right now. Just in case, we're experimenting with a slow mode on the text channel, and you can edit what you said. If you say something, you can edit it, and if it seems like not that many people are saying too much, I can take the slow mode off so that everybody can talk more. But yeah, we have this panel is going to be a crop deaths panel. We're going to explore a few things. Usually crop deaths is something that people who eat meat use to try and sort of kind of belittle the vegan diet or attack the vegan diet and say, look, no matter what you try, you're still going to be killing animals. In fact, sometimes you're killing more animals than us and making some pretty ridiculous things, ridiculous claims about, you know, how maybe grass-fed beef kills less animals than, you know, your plant products, things like that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, but I also have noticed there's a conversation going on here about how vegans should be thinking about crop deaths and how, yes, they're obviously real. So we're going to be talking about how, you know, how much we should do, how much energy should we put into it, what amount of activism should we allocate to, you know, lowering crop deaths and so forth. And so we have a few people here. It looks like Leanna's mic is working, maybe. I saw a little green rim around you. So we have...
Tell me.
Yes, it's working. That's awesome. Okay,
oh, yeah.
So we had difficulties. So we've got Leanna, a.k.a. the Tofu Goddess. We have Seb Alex, and we have Nick Lyston from our own server right here. Boom. So if you guys want to introduce yourselves really quickly, we can start with Tofu. Want to go for it?
Sure. Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited about this. I have a small but growing YouTube channel where I discuss vegan issues related to politics, philosophy, current events, and that's about it.
Awesome. All right, Seth.
Hey everyone, my name is Seb Alex. I am an animal rights activist. I'm right now working on growing my YouTube channel as well. But usually I just do anything from street activism to civil disobedience events and rescues.
Awesome. And then Nick, if you got your mic going, go for it.
Yeah, I'm also growing my YouTube channel, but currently it's in the gestational stage, so it actually hasn't been born yet.
Just a twinkle in your eye.
Yeah, though I do have another Discord server called the Silver Rule that people can check me out on. And eventually, I mean, within the next week or so, I plan to put some videos up on a YouTube channel so they can find out where if they go there.
Cool. So I also want to mention, yeah, I will be reposting this in its entirety on Mike the Vegan 2, which thank you everybody so much. We already have over 1,000 subscribers there, which is super awesome. It's growing. It's baby channel. And so that's sweet. So you, Nick, you also, I don't want to say you were being modest there, but in terms of your background, you studied, what is it, cognitive neuroscience or something?
Oh, yeah. So I have a doctorate in veterinary medicine and a master's in neuroscience, and I used to teach neuroscience when I was doing research in that field. I've also I spent a year running a monkey sanctuary and several years working with animals, with primates mostly, in laboratory conditions as well as studying them in the wild.
Sweet, awesome.
Oh, and I've been a vegan for 25 years.
Dang, you beat me, man. I'm only up at 8. Yeah, dude, that's epic. So I will also invite anybody who wants to talk. Anything that's in general will not be shown later on the playback. So if you want to say something, definitely, if you want it to be seen, say it in the Think Tank text channel, which is right above the audio channel. All right, so let's just hop right into it. And I will say, this is going to be, we're going to talk about crop deaths for at least a half an hour is my goal. And if we keep wanting to talk about it, we can keep talking about it. But if we want to move on to another topic after a while, like for example, if we just feel like we've all said as much as we want to say about crop deaths, like we can open it up. We're going to open up to the audience no matter what at the end, but like if something happens where we run out of things to talk about crop deaths, we'll move on to another topic. Anyway, so as many of you know, obviously animals die within plant farming. It's pretty obvious, and vegans are trying to reduce harm. So I guess if you have something to say, I'll go through one by one and see just what your guys' initial sort of statement on crop. It doesn't have to be an official statement, but your initial thoughts on crop deaths are and what vegans should think about it. So let's switch the order up here and go Seb. Seb, you ready?
All right, yeah. So it's honestly quite ridiculous that we are the ones like kind of now responsible for crop death. I think usually what I say is, of course, like, yeah, there are unintentional crop deaths and sometimes even intentional crop deaths by farmers. And although like we like vegans, if we had the chance, we would decide to build a world where that wouldn't happen. This is the reality at the moment, but it's definitely not the main thing that we should focus on now, just because of numbers. When it comes down to numbers, how many animals are killed. And so I think it's important to mention that as a vegan, what you're doing is basically trying to reduce the suffering that you cause onto innocent beings, and especially stop the intentional suffering. And as long as the world is switching to a plant-based food system, the day that it starts switching to a plant-based food system, I'm sure we will also all start working on like trying to see how we can change this.
For
Now,
sure.
one thing we have to keep in mind is that the majority of crops are actually planted for to be used as animal feed, so feed for 60 billion land animals, and not like less than 2% of world vegan population. So it is still, if you consume less crops by going vegan simply because you're not contributing to animal agriculture, it also means you are reducing your crop deaths that is, let's say, caused on your behalf, say, per person. However, I have looked into many videos and studies and everything, and even the numbers that they have claimed before about crop deaths have been extremely misleading, and the numbers are actually quite small from what I have found.
Cool, for sure. Yeah, and I will say, yeah, so just to sum it up, and that's my view as well, like if, not to sum your whole thing up, but that one statement, if vegans were in charge of all farming, you can bet that crop deaths would be lower. I mean, it'd basically be the number one priority. And I will say we had a quick question here of what percentage of crops are used to feed animals. This does vary, but I have, there's a paper with a quote directly from the FAO saying the majority of crops are fed to animals, and I can link that paper later, and I will link it in the show notes here later at the end. But it varies as well depending on who is estimating it, but it's hovering around half or more, so that's a very valid statement, I would say. So yeah. Tofu, you got something, so unless Seb, unless you want to respond to that, Tofu.
No, okay.
Cool. Leanna.
Okay, well, I guess when I think crop deaths, I think like how much should vegans care about this issue? We all acknowledge it exists, and we all acknowledge that this is bad. And to answer that question, I mean, it's hard to quantify. Like, the answer is yes, we ought to be concerned, but how much? I mean, I guess that would depend on how we can really do about the situation right now. Because as vegans, we must be concerned with minimizing all cruelty to animals. But as things are right now, like you guys were talking about earlier, if vegans are in charge of everything, yeah, there would be minimal crop deaths. In terms of like what should we be really focusing on this right now? I'm not so sure, but it's definitely something we should be actively working on in the future.
Here's a good question for you, and I'll throw this at everybody. If you were to break down a percentage for vegan activism and where their energy or time should go, like, do you think 20% should be spent on crop death? Do you think 1%, 0%? What's your thought?
Yeah, I mean, to answer that question, it really depends on it just depends on your perspective on the issue. Like, some people would say we should be putting our efforts in things that are going to be the most effective and are the easiest to accomplish sooner and right away. So, I mean, getting people to care about crop death seems way further down the line than get to even to stop abusing their own pets, So you might argue it makes vegans look crazy if you start saying that you can't eat certain plants now. So I don't have the answer to that question, and it really depends on a variety of factors with your own perspectives. I personally, I don't even know.
Yeah, well said. You're saying that there could be actually a potential barrier to entry issue if vegans actually start putting way too much emphasis on crop. Anyway, I'll let Nick talk. Nick hasn't talked yet very much. So what are your thoughts right away there?
Well, so I take the view that the life of a single being capable of experiencing the sort of conscious states that give our own lives meaning is incalculable and cannot be just you can't add individuals to one another. This is what makes me a strong deontologist. So essentially, if a being is
Deontologist. Sorry,
capable,
you blanked out there
a
for a second. You said
strong, a
deontologist.
strong deontologist. So if a being is capable of love, then they have practically infinite value. And because each individual is infinite value, it doesn't really matter to me how many lives that we're talking about. Each life has to have that infinite value. And so, now unfortunately, we can't live our lives in a way that doesn't involve harming others. In fact, even killing others. I mean, this is going to happen. We're going to hit people when we're driving. And sometimes we'll even foresee those deaths, like for example, like collateral damage in war. But the one thing that we can never allow ourselves to do is to kill someone else who's capable of experiencing a state like love for the purpose of using them for our own purposes. I mean, everyone's life, the most fundamental thing that belongs to them is their life, and we can never take that away for our own use. So even if killing one grass-fed cow would involve less killing than the animals that are killed in crop deaths, it's still far worse to take the life of that cow because you're using that cow. You're using that being for your own purposes. And that's far worse than killing someone in the act of doing something else. It's known as it's related to the doctrine of double effect. If someone wants to look that up, but
And I do want to clarify a couple of. So a lot of people here probably aren't familiar with deontology. I mean, I guess it's just a more like a philosophical system. That's more to, I guess you describe it as like the duty. Do you want to the duty sort of angle? Do you want to like nutshell that really quickly for people that aren't familiar with it?
Well, I mean, so not all deaths are created equal. So on one level, the standard case that people often think about when they're trying to decide about, when they're trying to decide, when they're trying to think about moral issues, is the one between is this trolley dilemma. So you have a trolley that's careening down a road, and you can push a lever and divert the trolley to a sidetrack where it will kill one person, and you know that person is going to die. However, if you don't do that, it's going to strike five people and kill them. And people and a deontologist would say that even though not pushing the lever is going to lead to five people dying, it still cannot be done because our first obligation is to not kill, even if it involves letting a certain number of people die, a greater number.
Yeah.
And that's usually where the discussion, at least now, kind of ends. People kind of look at they ask the question whether they're a deontologist or a utilitarian. But I take it one step further, and the question I ask is whether that individual that you're killing, whether that individual is actually being used for the purpose of whatever good effect you're trying to achieve. So this would be another variation of the trolley dilemma, where instead of moving a lever where the train diverts into an alternate track and kills one person, you actually, let's say, push the person onto a train track. And what makes that situation different, besides the fact you're pushing the guy, is the fact that you're using that person's death to stop the train. You actually want the person to die because that death is instrumental to saving the other five people. So you're using him as a tool. He's not merely collateral damage. And the way you can think about, the two different situations is that person necessary to exist for you to achieve the end that you want? In the case of the first situation, the trolley dilemma, where you divert the train, if that guy wasn't on the sidetrack, you could still divert the train and save the five people. But in the second case, where you actually have to push the guy onto the train track, you need that guy to die to save the five people, just like you need that cow to die in order to get the meat. You don't need those animals to die on the crop field in order to get your crops. If those animals didn't exist, you could still get your crops. And that's a crucial difference that I think is often overlooked in these discussions.
Okay, I want to explore that more in a bit, but I want to go to Seb here in a second. But for me, as somebody who isn't super into philosophy, the best explanation of deontology versus utilitarianism that I saw was just that, let's say you have a child and they're really sick and they need a medication that's super expensive. A utilitarian would say steal the medication to save the child, but a deontologist would say you have a duty not to steal it, because if it was an ethical system society-wide that it would be okay to just steal anything to save someone's life, all of a sudden you have, a breakdown of of society and things like that. So I want to move on to Seb, because I haven't heard from her in a while, and we'll come back and talk about this more in a second, Nick, because it's complicated and things like that. But I just want to, my goal is to get an even sort of distribution of everyone who's talking. That's always my goal as a panel host. So Seb, do you have any thoughts really quickly before I ask you another question?
Yeah, I do want to add one thing, is that people in general, like, they don't care about crop deaths. Like, how many of you has actually seen someone advocating for the rights of animals that are killed in crop deaths? It's just something to try to hold against vegans when vegans raise the question of ethics when it comes to killing animals. It's just one of those things, well, you are also killing animals. But the thing is, like, it's like, when was the last time people actually advocated to change that? And I can assure you that the only time in history when that is going to happen is when the majority of animals that are being killed are, like, it's not happening anymore, and vegans are switching to the crop death question.
That's
like,
a huge point.
Once we get to that point, we're definitely going to talk about crop deaths as well. I have read something else, but not in a study, and that was the fact that actually, if you think about it, the huge fields, the massive fields that are used for crops are actually the ones that cause crop deaths because of the immense machines they use in the process. And usually those ones are like never the fields that are used for human food. It's just for animal feed. So like, if you see those huge, I don't know, like tractors or whatever, I don't know what they call them, the harvesting machines, the combines. Those are like really expensive machines that are only bought for massive projects. And like, if you're buying tomatoes, like, yeah, tomato fields can be huge, but not as huge as soy fields in the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a huge point here that is just, vegans see all the time, but people who aren't vegan probably would disagree with that. Vegans are just held to a much, much higher standard than the average person. Like, I've never seen anybody who eats meat get mad at another person who eats meat for the crop test that they cause by the animal the animal feed. Yeah, like, so that's huge. And I'm trying to think if we want to do questions yet. I guess Tofu, if you have any thoughts really quickly, let's keep it rotating.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, actually, this reminds me of something. I assure you, the day that, let's say, if we're done with animal agriculture and we're starting to talk about crop deaths, people will find something else to hold against us. And this, like, I know from personal experience, when I used to work, before I was an architect, I was working with the UNHCR, so the United Nations Refugee Committee. And we used to like stand on a street and talk to people and see if they would pledge a monthly sum just to help for refugees arriving to Europe, or even in actually refugees around the world, not necessarily coming to Europe. But so what would happen is some people would stop and say, well, what about the people here? And yeah, it's a valid question. What about the people here? But there are organizations working on people already in their like own country having issues. And then they would say, what about homelessness in Spain, And then you would ask them, like, are you doing something about homeless people in Spain? And they would just walk away. So even if another organization went down on the street and started working for homeless people, then someone would find, what about my, I don't know who, like, someone can and will always bring another cause into it just to take the attention away from what you're doing, because the fact that you're doing something makes them feel guilty that they're not doing anything.
Yeah, that's a huge point. I've seen that with environmentalism a lot too. Like, you drive a Prius. Exactly. Oh, well, how about you know, if you drive an electric car, how about where those metals come from, those rare earth metals and things like that, which is valid,
Yeah.
but it's always a deflection or a derailing, which will then make the person who's not doing the good thing feel a little bit better about not doing the good thing. Leanna, do you have anything to say?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I guess just to go off what you guys, there's just been a lot said since I last talked. Just going off of what you were just talking about, it's so true that people always bring these other causes up as distractions. But if you really think about it, like in terms of the sheer amount of oppression, like the animals are so underrepresented, like disproportionately. So you know, when people bring these other causes up, like of course I care about that, but the thing is, like, I'm a vegan and I speak for the animals exactly because they're the most oppressed beings on this planet. Like, to say that I shouldn't be caring about them when they have no representation is just so, like, ridiculous. And also, I just wanted to, like, briefly just touch on something Nick said about the distinction between, like, crop deaths and actually killing the animal for their flesh to consume. We don't have to like go into that right now, but at some point I think it'd be kind of interesting to talk about how that distinction would affect how we do our activism and how we approach the issue, because he's right. I think that's something that's not touched on a lot, and I think it is worth discussing.
Yeah, I think we can circle back to Nick's points, and I will say, so to sum it up, what I believe Nick was saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's a different ethical implication for a death as a sort of outcome of something, as opposed to a intentional killing of someone. Is that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's how I see it.
Nick, you there?
Yeah. You know, for me, I mean, the question I was asking myself is whether you're stealing something from someone else that belongs to them, and using that for your own purposes. And certainly, we have to all acknowledge that the most fundamental thing that we all own is the body that our minds are born into. That's our vessel. That's the most primary thing that we own. So if you kill someone, that's one thing. But then if you actually use their body for your own purposes, that's just adding insult to injury. And that's the one thing that I think we can live our lives and never do. We can't ever avoid not hurting or killing anyone, but we can avoid not using them as a tool that way.
So to play devil's advocate here a little bit, how would you respond to somebody who said, you know, more of a utilitarian approach, but saying it's really just about your total death count, how many animals are being killed because of what you're doing, and it doesn't necessarily matter how you frame it within your own decisions. It's, at the end of the day, it's a mathematical equation of how many animals have you killed.
I mean, so I don't want to like go off against, you know, utilitarians in here, but one thing that's interesting to note is that people who have brain damage, particularly of the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain that's involved in processing guilt as well as regret. When you give them moral questions like the trolley dilemma, they generally do make utilitarian choices, which effectively are treating lives the same way you would treat bushels of apples. I would rather have 2 bushels of apples survive rather than 1 bushel of apples. Unfortunately, you know, there's a famous saying by Rabbi Hillel, which is that when you save one individual, you save the universe, and when you kill one individual, you destroy the universe. And I think it's a much more empathetic and connected way to look at sentient minds by treating them as having, you know, incalculable value and not treating them as though they're somehow additive. And I guess I would also say that, you know, sentience and morality and suffering, all these things, and love, they happen on the level of the individual. It's you that loves, not a collective. And so we need to treat individuals as having intrinsic value, not collectives.
Got it. Now, there's one thing you said a while back, which I think people were curious about, and you said you made a brief comment about how every living being should have infinite value or something like that. And if that is what your position is, then you would value a ant as much as a cow? Is that true, or what is your thought on that?
Well, my view on this is maybe a little more controversial than some.
That's fine.
But I really I sort of reserve that sort of sentiment to someone who's capable of experiencing the sort of conscious states that give our own lives meaning when we think about it. So when you look at, why, the worst thing you can do to someone is to take their life. And why is it such a horrible thing to take someone's life? It's because you're taking away their future. And why is it so terrible to take away someone's future? Because you take away every opportunity they'll ever have until the end of time to experience the sort of states that give our own lives meaning, particularly things like love. And so if a being is incapable of experiencing a state like love, then I don't look at them in the same way. So I don't know if an ant can necessarily experience that. So I wouldn't necessarily put them in that category as having that sort of that sort of infinite value, because they don't really have as much to lose when they die.
Got it, got it. I have a question. I'll move back to Seb because you haven't talked in a while. So beyond activism, do you think that vegans should be trying to purchase foods that you could guess, we only have a best guess here, that would have lower crop deaths? For example, have you ever seen a video of them harvesting certain nuts? They literally shake the tree. Obviously, there can be other crop deaths involved, but that's an example.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that everyone should be trying is to obviously buy local products, and if they know where it's coming from, then even better. But the thing is, like, what is the percentage of people who actually have the ability to do that? Like, where I'm living right now, I have the privilege to plant my own kale, so I don't have to buy kale, and maybe that way I'm not contributing to crop that's caused by kale. But can you, we can't even come up with a number of people who have literally no way to do these things. So, but it's definitely the majority of people. Majority of people live in cities and they don't have the space that I have, for example, right now. And therefore they will buy things from wherever they can afford. And if you can afford to buy from somewhere where you know that there's no crop deaths, then of course it's better to do that. But if you are vegan already, I would automatically assume that you are doing that anyway. And if you're not, yeah, you should consider it. I do have one question back to Nick. I was wondering the point you brought up about if a being doesn't have that, well, if a being can't experience love, then you see them in a different way, you said. Just to test, let's say, like, I'm gonna bring up a hypothetical example. If a human being who had certain disabilities made them like impossible to experience love, would you also see them in a different way? If yes, why? If no, why not? So yeah.
Oh, thanks for asking. I mean, so when I talk about love in the context of animals and in this conversation, I'm talking about a state that gives our lives meaning. And you could use more broadly a term like joy. And people that are ahedonic and or that aren't able to feel love, they can experience joy in other ways too. I mean, if you ever watch Silence of the Lambs, I mean, even Hannibal Lecter is enjoying this symphony, and he's like, you can see him totally in ecstasy. So the only so love is merely one form of extreme joy that of sort of existential bliss that we can experience, but it's one that we share with non-human animals, or at least some non-human animals.
Yeah.
I wanted to, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to bring something that Tofu Goddess said. I think it was actually something that she was alluding to something you said about why why it's important to focus on veganism as opposed to like when you're advocating for it, as opposed to when someone comes at you with like saying they're interested in like some other. And I really like I really like there was a recent talk street activism event with Jack Humane Ancock, where someone asked him that very question, and his reply was in reference to what Cosmic Skeptic said in that recent atheism event talk, which was that if you go to 100 people and ask them, is it okay to have child labor or sweatshops or bomb children in Syria, almost everyone will say that no, it's wrong, even if they support it somehow, but through their dollars or whatever. But if you say, is it okay to kill animals just for the point of taste pleasure? Almost everyone, the majority of people will say yes. And that's what makes veganism the most crucial moral issue that exists or that has ever existed, and the one that we must focus the most on. I think it's a really important sentiment. I just would like, so I mean, that's why, anyway, I think that, yeah. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that? I mean, I guess that's kind of off topic, so.
Well, the principle is the same. I mean, if anyone has something to say, go for it.
Yeah, I guess like I did listen to that talk, and it was really great. And I really think that point, I had never thought about the point that you made on why veganism is so important. And I guess like if you just look back at history with other movements that were, other justice movements such as like civil rights, let's say, or the anti-slave trade revolution, or the women's rights, the suffragettes in the UK, at all times when these movements were taking place, the majority of people were in the beginning against it. So that's why it blew up like crazy, like the revolution, like the way it happened. Like I think the anti-slave trade revolution started with 800 people in a metal factory at a time where like almost 3/4 of the world was like involved in the slave trade industry, so it also gives me hope, because as you said, if you go down on the street today and ask people, most people would say yes to killing animals for pleasure. So I think that point is really important. And other than that, I just hope that we can have the same outcome that other justice movements had. But I guess that's it for me.
Cool. I want to get a little bit of audience input here, and I'm going to pop a couple questions off, and we can save them for a little bit later, more for later, because we can do it quite quickly. So we have a question by Casvis. Hopefully I didn't say that wrong. Is organic food vegan? And so I want to expand the question a little bit. Sorry to editorialize, because we could essentially go on to an endless discussion here on organic food. But a lot of organic foods use animal-based fertilizers, blood meal, bone meal, fish meal, etc. And so I think the question here really is, where does organic food come into this crop deaths debate? Because one could argue, and I don't necessarily agree with this every time, that there can be more animal deaths, animal impact by buying organic food through the deaths from that crop down the line through the whole supply chain, because it's supporting animal agriculture and by buying their byproducts. So who feels like they've talked the least? Tofu, do you want to say something about it?
Well, I would just say that if it's the case that organic farming produces more crop deaths, it's easy for me to say I'll just not buy organic because I don't really care about that. Seems pretty clear cut to me, but I don't know anything about like the numbers or the science behind that, so I can't comment on that front.
That's kind of the problem. I'll try and call you Leanna from now on too. We don't really have numbers on it. And I will say, for future reference, anybody who's posting meat, if they're trying to make a point, that's kind of a gray area if they're trying to say there's something on the label here. But there's rule number 7 is don't post meat or animal violence just to troll. And so I understand there's a little bit of gray area, so I'm giving a warning to no label here, and he's apologized. So thank you for recognizing that. So we don't have the numbers. That's the thing. We don't know how much it is. And there's also the argument that pesticides will be killing a lot more animals as well, and creating a lot more harm to animals the more pesticides and synthetic, chemicals that are used. Seb, do you have anything to say about that? Organic in general?
No, about organic, I guess it comes down to like, if they're not using pesticides, then they're using like manure or like whatever they use that comes from animals. There's always something that's going to be used. But I guess like the thing is, these are also kind of related to kind of byproducts from the industry that you would buy. Let's say like the cow manure, to buy. It's like if we end the industry, then cow manure wouldn't be a business because it wouldn't exist in the amount that it does today. And it's more like the reason why they use so much of it is because they have to do something with the waste. not because they really want to use it. They just really have to do something with the waste because it's so much that it's destroying ecosystems. So might as well just use it in the fields. But yeah, when it comes to pesticides, I know that animal feed crops use much more pesticides than crops that are used for human.
Yep, Nick, you have any input?
Well, I mean, I would like to say that just because I say that using animals as tools is worse and is completely should be completely forbidden, as opposed to collateral damage, that doesn't mean it isn't still murder to take someone's life on purpose. And I think that we do have an obligation to reduce crop deaths. And one way that you can do, or we can do that, and I think as a movement we really need to do this, is through supporting farms that engage in veganic agriculture. Also, farms will sometimes use drones that will scan the fields. Deer often leave their fawn in the wheat fields, and because the fawn are the same color as the wheat, but they don't know how to run away from tractors. And I've seen on these farmer forums that they're just devastated by the number of fawn they run over, just so that that they don't even see them. But if they use drones, they could see them. And we as vegans do have an obligation to not to murder these animals. I mean, we're aware of these animals dying, so and that we're supporting their killing. So we really do need to do a lot more, I think, to be aware of these things and support farms that make these efforts.
Yeah, that's a huge point, and I mean, it's pretty amazing just what you can do with technology in a drone. You can get a drone that can do that for just a few $100s, and everybody loves having drones anyway at this point for like recreational purposes. So I think that's an awesome solution. If anybody has any other, why not any other creative solutions they want to put forward for preventing crop deaths, feel free to hit it. I mean, there's all sorts of things you could do. You could have before you harvest or whatever, you could just make absurdly loud, you could have an air horn. You could just blow an air horn or something, which obviously that fawn might not be able to run away, for example. But even if somebody's about to spray some type of pesticide, obviously I'd prefer having everything be non-toxic, but even then you could probably blow an air horn and then spray the pesticides or whatever, and probably kill less crop deaths. Anyway, I'm just thinking creatively. There's also totally different farming methods, like indoor farming. It's more expensive, but that'll result in way less crop deaths. Arguably, you could get to 0 deaths pretty easily doing that. I'm going to open it up to the next question here, which is on Mike, which is going to be no label. I'm going to unmute you for just a second, and we're going to try and keep if anybody has a quick follow-up, ask the question concisely, and then if you have a quick follow-up thing to say, we'll try and you get a quick instance to say something else, but we don't want to keep conversations going too long. We want to move it on. All right, so unmuting you in 3, 2, 1, go.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Hey, yep, sounding good.
Okay, so the question is, do you potentially think that a carnivore that slaughters one per year...
Oh, you just blanked out. You blanked out. You might need to talk a little bit louder, sorry.
Oh. Here, do I sound better?
Way better, yep.
Okay, excellent. The question is, do you potentially think that a carnivore that slaughters 1 cow a year for their caloric needs could be more quote-unquote vegan than someone that eats 1,000 pounds of monocrop grains and vegetables?
All right, thank you. Yeah, thanks. So, anyone want to answer that right off the bat? I would say it's very much the utilitarian thing we were talking about earlier, but if anyone has...
I've thought about this before. Actually, someone who kills 1 animal per year and lives off that animal and doesn't eat literally anything else, because if they do end up eating vegetables, then they're still contributing to crop deaths. If they were only, let's say, on the carnivore diet and eating 1 dead animal the whole year, they're better than literally any vegan that I've met, because they're causing less suffering. And that's a fact. That's literally a fact. If you kill 1 animal versus killing, 20 animals, let's say, a year because of crop deaths, then your impact is obviously much less.
So you're taking the position that they are more... Oh, sorry. You're saying they are more ethical.
So I'm not sure if I feel comfortable saying they are more ethical for the following. First of all, we want to reach a world where, like, we are fighting for a world where everyone can eat plant-based foods, and then hopefully plant-based foods that don't cause crop deaths. All right, so it is not in any way realistic that we apply what that person is doing to 7 billion people around the world. Or let's say we're not even aiming for 7 billion, let's even say 3 billion. 3 billion people can't go out and kill and eat from that like the whole year, you know? So it's not realistically, like it can't be applied, realistically speaking. Another thing is that as long as you are intentionally killing an animal and eating that animal, you are confirming that animals and their bodies are products for you to use. And when you do that, you are taking part in speciesism, which cannot make it possible for you to go and talk against speciesism to reduce animal suffering. So yeah, you might be doing your part on a very personal level, but that's where it stops. Because you can't contribute to anything else. You can't contribute to the change the way a vegan could, because you are intentionally harming an animal, and your solution is not like a realistic solution for the majority of the world to adapt.
Tofu, do you want to respond? Or sorry, Leanna.
Yeah, no, it's
so
honestly,
easy
you
to
can
say
call me
tofu.
tofu.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say it's this question. I don't think it's really productive, because I don't really see a difference like between killing. Let's say, let's take this out of an animal context. Would you say someone who only tortures and kills one person is better than someone who only tortures and kills 1,000 people? That person is still a murderer. So we apply it to animals.
So you're calling all vegans murderers?
Not quite. I would say that anyone who partakes in killing of even one, that's just as bad as killing 1,000, and that person is absolutely not one who kills all your.
You blinked out a little. Sorry, can you say that again?
I said that person is not who an animal a year is not more by any means than a person who kills animals all around.
You're blanking for some reason. Like your mic has gotten more like less sensitive or something. You're saying the person who kills something. Sorry, let's give it one more try.
Okay. I'm saying a person who kills one animal is not any better or ethical than a person who kills animals all year round.
Got it. So yeah, okay. I'm gonna let Nick respond in a second, but I just want to say the one animal thing. This is where the deontological argument comes in for me, because you're talking about also what would work as the best system for the world, right? And so if first, right now, meat actually makes up a surprisingly small amount of calories. I think I calculated all animal products was like under 20% of total calories for the world. If we decide to say, let's turn the whole world into grass-fed beef, first of all, grass-fed beef, because it would have to be that for it to lower the crop, for you to lower the crop deaths. If you did that, then all of a sudden you have 150 to 200% time till slaughter weight, which means more. Not to mention you also have 3.5 times more methane emissions. I talk about that study a lot. But you're going to be, first of all, I would doubt whether it's even possible to meet that demand. But the idea is, the deontological idea is that you want to, use, apply these maxims, which are rules for society that would work. And so that just doesn't necessarily apply to how a solution could be used to just say, oh, I can just eat these cows and do less damage, especially because the amount of land that we would need to clear and the animals that we would need to kill to make that grass-fed vision possible would be huge. And then also, no one is ever counting predator deaths in this situation. They're never counting any of those types of external death cost in that. As well. So let's move on to
Mike. You say you're not a philosopher.
I'm not. Like, I regularly forgot. Like, I didn't talk about deontology for so long. I actually forgot what it was the other day. But Nick, I'm sure you have something to say about this right now.
Oh yeah. So basically, everything I said at the beginning, directly fits into my answer to this question, which is that no, it's wrong. It's completely, you cannot allow yourself to kill one animal, even if theoretically that, to kill one animal for its flesh, even if that would lead to less deaths than killing animals with crop deaths. There's no because ultimately, so there's something that the modern vegan movement, and as I mentioned before, I've been a vegan for 25 years, and when I became a vegan, veganism was largely focused upon animal experimentation. And with animal experimentation, the idea is that you're killing an animal to potentially save hundreds, maybe even thousands of human lives. And the position still is that it's wrong because you're using those individuals, and their bodies are not yours to use. So so you can't use that cow to consume her flesh, even if that would even if in order to avoid doing that it would involve killing more animals than that cow. I think there's so vegans are often asked this question, sort of, if you were on a desert island and you had to eat the cow in order to survive, then then obviously you would do it then. And the answer should still be no, because it's not your obligation to survive. It's your obligation to not kill anyone, or not to exploit anyone to death. I mean, killing is something that maybe we can find understandable, but to actually use someone as a tool is something we can never allow ourselves. And sometimes it's preferable to let yourself die or even starve to death than go down that road. So no, I would not find that the person who's eating that animal, that cow, to be morally preferable to the one that's supporting the crop deaths.
Got it. And I would add another point here, which I've talked about in the past, is where I know it, like, some vegans are going to get mad at me for this, but I do ascribe to a certain degree of speciesism. Like, if I had to press a button and either have a cow die or a mouse die, like, I'm going to choose a cow. And I know it's probably, you could probably dissect that and have problems with it. But when you're talking about the level of intelligence and experience of a cow, I mean, just really bad anecdote of what I've experienced with cows and how amazing they are is I was at a wedding, and it was outside, and right in the field next to the wedding there were cows, and they were just kind of watching from a distance. And the moment that the people got married, they walked right up to watch that moment, and then they left. And it might have been a coincidence. But there's, they cry when they're young or taken away, and they'll follow them and stuff like that. But when you're talking about these crop deaths, which are actually debatable to the main one, the mice deaths are actually debatable in most situations, because they did one of the studies did a radio collar of these mice, and they found that virtually all of them were able to escape. I think this guy went and collared like 30 mice, and then he had a harvest situation, and the mice ran away. Pretty much all of them. I think there was maybe one of them. I'd have to get that up right now, and I hate talking about studies without having them right there. But it's arguable that it's almost impossible to say that that a vegan who's buying plants and having these crop deaths would actually be super huge. I mean, we don't really know. Anyway, so you had a quick follow-up. You may have asked it, we may have addressed it, but if you want to say it really quickly, no label, I'm giving you a second to say that right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, appreciate it. The second question is, do you think you can consider yourself a vegan if you know Monsanto-derived grains / vegetables?
If you know you're eating Monsanto-derived grains?
Yes.
Is that what you said? Okay, all right.
Yes.
Thanks. All right. Does anyone want to hit that? That's a bit of a can of worms.
I'll just jump in quick and get the ball rolling, I guess. From what I remember about Monsanto is, I mean, it's problematic in a multitude of ways, so I'm not sure what exactly the question, like the grievance is. Is it like the monocrops? Is it like the production of poison? I would say, insofar as like how it affects animals, I guess it kind of is related to the crop kill issue. Like, we don't intentionally pay for this, and again, if vegans were in charge of everything, this probably wouldn't be an issue. But I'm assuming it's in terms of like poisoning animals. I'm not really sure, but I guess the way I would answer this question would just be the way I'd answer the crop kill question. I think I just need clarification on what he means by that.
My guess would be just the damage that Monsanto is likely doing as a larger company like with supporting it. I think that's a little far off. I think we're going to move on. I want to get Nadia another on the mic question here, so I'm going to let you go, Nadia. Is Nadia gone? Oh no, here you go. Nadia in 3, 2, 1, go.
Hello. I was wondering what the availability of pesticide-free produce is, and is there useful labeling for it?
Great, awesome, thank you so much. Right off the bat, I would say when I was thinking about this panel, I was actually like going into a deep fantasization land of like in the future, somebody could make a label that would be not only like you could have a veganic label, but you could also have certifications, which I know can be polluted or whatever. But you could have a certification that is like uses certain practices that lower harvest deaths as much as possible, and you could have, similar to how you have organic certification, that you have to check certain boxes. Like you have to wait 3 years after conventional farming is done to be planting. You'd have something like, solid things like that. Like maybe drone scan is required before harvesting or whatever, things like that. So you guys want to answer that? Anyone have anything pressing they want to say? Nick, we haven't heard from you as much in the last 10 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually was reading the chat, so I actually missed the last thing you said.
Seb, you can go for it then.
All right. For I don't know. For me, it's never been something I've thought about, just because there's no labeling for it, as far as I'm aware, or as so far wherever I've been. Because even if they say organic, it doesn't mean there's no pesticides. It can have like I think up to 5% or 10%, depending on the country you're in. So, to my knowledge, it's not really that available to the majority of the population right now. And I think it would be amazing if it was. But yeah, I also don't know how it would be to produce such a massive amount of plant-based foods, because obviously plant-based foods is not only for vegans, it's for the whole world. How could we produce so much without using any type of pesticide? I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just wondering if it's possible.
Yeah, no, that's huge. Especially, we're talking about over 7 billion people, which is insane. I think even just being able to get it down, there's probably a good portion that are very preventable. Like there's a good portion of, we can focus on maybe large mammal deaths first if you want to. Now, obviously you don't have to do this.
Yeah.
And then you could implement things like the drone situation or fencing and various things like that, obviously feeding the world.
And there's like, I'm just going to cut you off for a second to share something they do here in Indonesia. There's a lot of rice fields everywhere. And so what they do every once in a while is they bring ducks and they let the ducks in the fields, and then the ducks eat the animals that are damaging the crops. And
that's an interesting line. Nick, I'd be curious to know, or Leanna, I'd be curious to know if you view that as animal exploitation, because these could be like pet ducks, or what you don't want to say pet companion ducks that can just kind of hang out and rotate, but then you're using them for something. So what do you guys think?
Well, yeah, my first thought is that you're using these animals for your own gain, and that just strikes me as inappropriate.
Dog agrees.
Yeah, oh god, the wrong time.
No, right.
That was perfect timing. Yeah.
Nick, thoughts?
I think that theoretically it would be possible that it's not that it would not be considered exploitation. Ultimately, I think that we have to look about exploitation in terms of whether someone would reasonably give consent to that interaction. If they're receiving as much benefit as you're providing them, then I think theoretically these interactions could be considered to be reciprocal and not exploitative. Yeah, obviously that can be abused with animals for sure.
Yep.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I think my issue with it is the potential for it to become cruel, as humans always end up abusing animals when we start what might start off as like a seemingly innocent relationship, symbiotic relationship. It always turns negative and cruel. So that's like whenever I hear anything that, even if it sounds nice, that involves humans using animals for their benefit, just That's
Red
my
flag.
first thought.
Yeah, I would say the one way I can envision it is like, let's say it is, even on a county level. Let's say you have a county that's all vegan. You could have an animal sanctuary that just has, it's like a duck sanctuary that also has access to these rice fields. Like that would work, but the moment you start like controlling things too in depth, then it becomes an issue. So we have another question from Kind Claw, not on the microphone. What are thoughts on large-scale hydroponic farming? One example, I believe, is Sundrop farms in South Australia. If anybody has looked into that and they want to talk, go for it.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of the farm, but
Sounds
just
cool.
Yeah, sounds cool. I know they also have a lot of like indoor farming in, was it Spain? I think, a surprising amount of indoor farming, very large operations there. I'll just answer it. Hydroponic farming is just more expensive per calorie as of right now than the way we farm. So, as time goes on and we have the resources, like if we just allocated our resources differently, like there's no reason that humanity doesn't have what it takes to shift to large scale hydroponic farms. Like we could easily do it. It's just under the capitalist system right now, it just doesn't make as much sense to do it. But my thoughts would also just be that large-scale hydroponic farming could potentially actually have zero animal deaths once you have the land allocated, because obviously any taking of new land would potentially have animal deaths. And they're probably, again, that certification I was dreaming about could have, thankfully, or hopefully, under a vegan system, we would free up nearly 50% of the lower 48 land, according to how much is used from the USDA's 2007 report. So the idea of clearing new land actually would probably never happen if you actually shifted over the whole system. But you could actually have specific guidelines for meeting a certification where clearing land is done like the most ethical, low animal death way. Anyone have anything to say about that? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next. Or if anyone has like a point that's hitting them right now.
I'm good.
Word. Okay, so Steve O. Not on mic. I'm assuming this is the real Steve O, because he's vegan. Is monocrop farming sustainable? How does choosing a vegan diet using rice, soy, and wheat compare to sourcing products that are produced in a more permaculture style of farming? Seb. Seb is gone. How about...
No, I just didn't hear you say Seb, sorry.
That's fine.
I was actually wondering, why did he shut up? All right, so my question would again be like, how available is permaculture style like products coming from permaculture style of farming? I have always wondered whether permaculture can replace monocrop farming one day. If it can, that would be absolutely amazing, because it's so much better for the soil as well to have such a variety of plants and different organisms living on it, instead of using just the same seeds over and over again on the same soil. But yeah, how many people like have access to a supermarket or like a farmer's market where it's coming from permaculture? I don't believe it's sustainable at all. And don't get me wrong, I'm not basing this on any study I've read. I'm just imagining that there's nothing sustainable that can come out from literally ripping the soil from all its nutrients like year after year after year. But yeah, I don't know.
I would answer that. I think monocropping as we have it right now is obviously not sustainable, but I think that if you had what would still be monocropping, but rotation, if you had proper rotation and then use of mycorrhizal fungi, which helps things like nutrient cycling, and you can have a no-till system as well. You can do crazy things like you can have a cover crop when that crop is done and then crimp it down for ground cover so you don't have to use weeds later with a roller crimper, crazy things like that. Tofu or Nick, have anything to say on that?
Nope.
Yeah,
I just don't know much about that.
That's completely fine.
I'm the same way. I don't really know anything about this.
Yeah, that is completely fine. Oh, we got another on mic here. We have Divine Heroine. I'm going to get you going in 3, 2, 1, and go. Divine Heroine, you are live.
Can you guys hear me?
Very, very slow, very lightly. So if you want to talk a little bit louder, that'd be awesome.
Um, is this better?
Yeah, that's great. Go for it.
Okay. Has anyone ever seen any article or study about recovery from injury, especially for athletes? I have not seen any scientific info about effectiveness or speed of recovery or anything about whether vegans are more prone to injury. It seems like a lot of sites I've come across, they imply that vegans are more prone to injuries, and that I guess it's just
Um,
scientific sources are much appreciated.
I would
So
say,
what is this about vegan and
I will
injuries?
say that would have been an awesome question for the panel we had last with the doctor panel. But this one is, as of right now, is currently on just like the crop deaths aspect. So I
Oh,
appreciate your question, and if you came late,
okay.
you wouldn't know that. I
So,
realize because we've had like things go through. So no,
yeah.
no, definitely no fault on you at all. But you know, if we shift
Okay.
into other topics at the end, we can talk about that later. And then
Okay,
Betty's
I'll
for thought have a
save it.
question. I would say for future, just filter for the topic as of now. Um, all right, yeah, sorry about that. We'll talk. I can talk about that with you in person later because I do have some thoughts about that. Not on Mike Snailentine, aka Clemmy, says, "Is it really important to avoid organic foods as much as you can as a vegan?" So she wants to get back on that organic topic. I don't know if anybody has like a good, quick response to that.
What was the question? To avoid organic foods or no?
Basically, so
That would be another really good one for the last panel as well.
yeah. Well, she's talking about ethically. She's talking
Yeah, I
about.
know, but that's like Avi's.
Oh, Avi is
thing.
obsessed with organic food, not being vegan. So I'm sure we might have a complete panel in the future about organic food and whether or not it's vegan. And we will have a talk. I'll talk to Avi about that because my view is different than Avi. All right, not on Mike Pumpkin Butter says, what about the health benefits of regenerative agriculture? Sorry, not the benefit, not health. What about the benefits in general of regenerative agriculture, which employs animals in symbiotic relationship with the ecosystem and utilize a model of biophilia, which is that loving animals? Hopefully, okay, that's that's a different type of in the farmer/animal relationship. I have a lot to say about that, but I'll let all three of you go first. Somebody's mic is a little bit loud. Tofu might have been typing. Who wants to hit that one first?
Oh, sorry. I thought I was muted.
It's fine. Anyone have any strong thoughts? Seb, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, using animals for your benefits is unjustified. That's all I have to say. There's no such thing. I don't know, like, I just don't see a relationship. Like, animals don't need us in any way. The opposite, I mean, we don't need them either, but if we are using them for something that is for our benefit, then that is unethical because they should just be left alone.
I would also add, yes, I was exactly about to talk about the biophilia meaning. A lot of times people put terms in front of things from an ethical perspective, humane blank, pastured blank. Biophilia means love of living in nature. So if you're trying to say having a loving relationship between the animal that you're about to kill, I'm sorry. Usually, I hope you don't kill the individuals that you love. Like, should be critical. But you probably want a more satisfying answer, unless Nick has something to say about this.
I mean, no. I mean, I guess theoretically, perhaps, but no. In the real world, I doubt it.
And so I would say this is something I've actually looked at in great detail when I studied sustainability university. I was sort of on board with the whole Alan Savory holistic management, holistic grazing, things like that. But then I looked more deeply into it, and I'm not gonna lie, it's probably it's a step better than straight up factory farming. But there's things that if you look closely, for example, the amount of methane. Usually, people are talking about cattle grazing here, and the amount of methane that is released is very, very concerning. And I've done several videos where I calculate the amount that's being released and not. For example, the White Oak Pastures paper I discuss in my video responding to Chris Kresser's original Game Changers Debunk on Joe Rogan, and I go in depth to that paper, which, it talks about how there's carbon that's being sequestered. Carbon would be sequestered even if we just took the animals, if we didn't put animals on it, and then they're emitting methane, which over a 20-year period, which people don't normally talk about, is up to 130 times more powerful than CO2. Burns really hot, and so to speak. And so that's a major issue, as well as how carbon reaches saturation with soil saturation. So over time, it sequesters less and less and less compared to something like trees. So even if I still don't believe that the methane emissions would ever be outdone by the carbon sequestration. But even if you say that does happen, it's not going to happen for very long. Anyway, so you can watch that video if you want more on that. Any of you guys have anything else to say on that?
Don't really know anything about that.
Okay. Like Polyface Farm, for example. There was an investigation by the Guardian did a paper on them, and for example, they ship in tens of thousands of pounds of grain to feed their chickens in their chicken tractor, which then also fertilizes their pastures. So we have some more questions. We might as well hop right on it. This one's getting a little bit off to antinatalism, which can get a little sticky. But if minimizing, this is from @Wolf spelled differently. If minimizing crop deaths can be done by being antinatalist and reducing the human population, shouldn't vegans be in favor of it? So that's a very wide open topic. So we'll have a brief response from everybody, I guess, who wants to have a response. Nick, we haven't heard from you in a little bit.
I find that question actually pretty tricky, because if our fundamental obligation is not to exploit others, then being alive, you're exploiting others. So certainly bringing new life in the world could be considered that way. However, if you can offset the amount of damage you do, and also avoid doing these exploitative killings, which I think are the thing we absolutely must forbid ourselves to doing, then we could actually produce less suffering and more pleasure, and on a utilitarian scale by having children. So I'm certainly not an antinatalist.
Seb?
Yeah, I personally am an antinatalist, but I wouldn't say that the crop deaths part would be like the reason why someone would consider this coming from this angle. It would be more about how much a baby, like a new human being, would need to consume just by being alive in this day and age, especially like in, let's say, civilized countries or developing countries. And just because of my personal views on what I consider like good or bad in being alive, I think for me, and not to sound depressing, life is not necessarily a good thing. So I can't really justify bringing someone into existence. But yeah, when it comes down to environmental damage or crop deaths or any other deaths that you cause, I do think vegans should consider antinatalism.
All right, Lena?
Yeah, my first thought in like this type of question is like there's certain lines that would not be acceptable to pass. So, theoretically, if we killed half the human population, we could reduce crop deaths. So that's obviously not an acceptable solution. And I kind of view the antinatalist sentiment in terms of like not having kids for environmental reasons to be kind of like absurd. For those same reasons, like having children is a natural right. It's an instinct of many people. It's a calling for many people. It's evolutionarily speaking, it's something many people desire. Like it's a part of who we are. So to say that we shouldn't be having kids for environmental reasons or to reduce crop deaths, it's just not a solution in the same way that killing half the human population would theoretically reduce crop deaths as well.
I just want to add one thing. I do think we have an obligation, if we have children, to do whatever it takes to make sure they're not only vegan, which is a philosophy of non-harm, but actually vegan activists. They are sensitized enough to try to offset the harm that they do by changing other people into the vegan philosophy.
Yeah, that's more or less my take on it. And I would add that you might actually become an anti-natalist activist with the partial, like if you were taking the angle of preventing crop deaths alone by advocating for anti-natalism, you could actually potentially turn more people away from veganism. Maybe this is a harsh view, and this is completely just a guess. I could be wrong. There's no data on this. Obviously, you could push more people away from veganism, and end up resulting in more more animal deaths. I don't know. That's pushing it. I don't think that's actually the case.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go for it. And I'm gonna look at this.
I definitely this is one of the reasons why I don't really talk about anti-natalism in my activism, just because it's already difficult enough to tell people what not to do in their day-to-day life, like especially with something like eating. I think it's much more difficult to tell someone like, I don't think it's good for you to have children, just because it's so personal. And unlike eating animals, it is actually natural to have children. The only kind of not counter argument, but just like a point I would like to bring is that although it is natural, a lot of animals in the wild, when their habitat starts getting destroyed, or for any reason, let's say the food that they rely on starts going down in numbers, they actually stop breeding for a while until the habitat has found itself again, and then they can continue. So it's not necessarily like it's natural, therefore no one should tell me not to have it. It's more like, well, it's natural, which is why you should stop for a bit. And maybe that means you don't have children, but someone in the future will at least have the opportunity to have children. So it's not like, I'm not like for a worldwide indefinite ban of
I think the Wolf, I'm just gonna call you Wolf, is clarifying the question. I think they're saying if there was theoretically a vegan world where crop deaths were the main deaths, would then anti-natalism? Okay. I'm not sure if that's the question, but I think we've talked about that enough. Beyond, by the way, I am permaculture certified, so there is a permaculture expert on the panel. I don't consider myself an expert, but I'm at least a journeyman permaculturalist. So let's move it on, unless somebody has something major to say. Another nod on mic. Link says, what do you think the relationship between veganism and meta ethics is? Do you think veganism should be moral realist? This is sort of opening a can of philosophical, I keep on saying opening a can of worms here over and over again, but I don't know if Nick, I feel like you're most first on that, if you want to have like a somewhat brief answer, because this is actually objectively doesn't have anything to do with crop deaths. Or not nothing to do, but it doesn't even say.
I'll be brief. I mean, I think there is a link because I think because I think that foundationally there's oh gosh, let me see how to approach this topic. Maybe I should punt on it. I think I think the general that veganism should be seen not as a philosophy about like as applied to applying some sort of system of justice to animals, but actually the way to apply a consistent principle of justice to everyone who could value being treated in a just way. It's sort of the final bastion of all moral philosophy, so I don't know if that's really actually answering the question, but I think that's kind of, I don't think veganism should be limited just to sort of some activism about animals. It should be actually looked at as a fundamental obligation that we all share as being sentient moral agents, or as being moral agents. And I guess I'll leave it at that, because otherwise it'll get really, it'll get into a big quagmire.
Word. I'm kind of sensing that we've kind of saturated some of the main points here, so I think I want to wrap this up in 10 minutes and keep it just a little bit over an hour, because as much as we love talking about crop deaths all day, we don't need to go we don't want to go on forever. So I'm going to see if anyone else has any points they want to add now. Seb? Okay, no, Seb's mic was just popping on and off.
Well, yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead, Tiffany. Yeah.
Well, if you were if you wanted to add on saying...
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit.
Heck. I was going to kind of change the conversation topic a little bit. So if you were going to add on to what you were saying, I'll let you do that.
Well, I just want to quickly address sort of this idea of deontology being about duty, because I don't see it that way, and I just want to clarify that I think fundamentally we have an innate moral drive. Now, I don't know where this innate moral drive comes from, whether it's actually attached to consciousness itself, because generally this idea of fairness and justice is something that's pretty ubiquitous across all cultures. This desire, this belief that you must treat others the way you'd want to be treated yourself, and so I think that when there often vegans talk about how children, like, if you give them a carrot and a rabbit, they'll eat the carrot and they'll hug the rabbit, and when you're faced with a choice which involves harming someone else, I mean, you're going to have a foundational compulsion not to do that harmful act, especially when it's an exploitative act. So I think that so I don't really think that that fundamentally deontological moralism is really about duty. It's about doing what is foundational to yourself to give yourself the chance of fulfillment in life, and to also unlock the right to accept happiness. Because one of the most fundamental ways to not be able to enjoy your life is when deep down you feel guilt because you've deprived someone else's ability to enjoy their life. And so that's what I think veganism is about. So maybe that kind of touches more on sort of the meta-ethical question.
Got it. I have an interesting question here. I want to get one that no one has asked, or someone who hasn't asked a question, sorry. But to Divine Heroine, because you would technically be next. I will say, though, she asked, what are the solutions that help return nutrients back to the soil? Crop rotation increases the nitrogen. You can rotate nitrogen-rich leguminous crops because they fix nitrogen. And that way, you switch off year to year. That'll return a lot of nutrients. Again, I'm a major fan of mycorrhizal fungi because it increases the bioavailability of existing nutrients in the soil as well, because it sort of extends the network. But the next one is from @pumpkinbutter. They say, isn't the Monsanto question the same as the honey question, or worse from a vegan point of view, considering soil ecosystems damage and the large-scale death of earthworms inherent to the use of glyphosate/Liberty Link. Liberty Link is another pharmaceutical company. Pesticide, I think. Anybody have any answers to this? I think you're asking, is it sort of like how we're going to kill insects indirectly or harm insects? Anyone have any thought on that?
I think, again, I would agree that, using these poisons or whatever it is, I don't really know that much about the science behind it, is the same question of, just the general issue, crop deaths. I would include insects in crop deaths, and if Monsanto or any corporation is poisoning insects to grow crops, then it would fall under that category. So, yeah, if she's asking, isn't it, the same thing, then, yeah, I would agree.
And then we have another one from Leroy, not on mic, because here's a good one. The lab-grown meat, Killer Queen, potentially off topic, but I kind of want to tie this topic in regardless. The newest studies of lab-grown meat, a lot of vegans say no, presumably no to lab-grown meat because it's still going to exploit animals originally. However, it would be possible also to stop crop deaths. So would that sway some of your opinions if you're originally against lab-grown meat for carnivorous consumption? I have a really quick response to that first, and then I'll hand it over. I don't think it would stop crop deaths because the growth medium that those animal products are going to grow in are going to require things like calories and nutrients, and therefore crops. So it could massively lower crop deaths, make be more efficient, and obviously it's going to lower direct animal death. Anyway, that's my take. So, anyone?
Sorry.
No, I just wanted to say that when it comes to lab-grown meat, at the moment they are still directly killing an animal, so they need bovine serum. Was that what it's called?
Bovine fetal calf serum, whatever you want
Yeah,
to call it.
yeah, exactly.
I've spoken to people in the industry, and they say it's absolutely never going to be scalable with that. And there's claims of plant-based mediums being used already in some.
All
so
right.
yeah, you can't go to market with fetal calf serum because it's just too expensive to drain a baby cow of their blood. Yep.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, but I think we can move on from that. I think we got touched on that pretty well, unless Nick has something to say on it.
Oh no, that's all right.
Cool. All right. Potentially off topic from At Killer Queen. Love that song. The newish studies. Oh, sorry, that was the same one. I read the same one. Okay, Leroy. That's what I meant to read. But I do like that song. Second time I read it. Not sure if the panel are aware of the cocoa bean industry in the Ivory Coast, on Africa, of course. But if there is clear evidence that there is child slave labor involved in cocoa bean farming in Ivory Coast, then would you agree that our moral imperative to boycott chocolate sourced from Ivory Coast? Would you agree that we would have a moral imperative to do that? That would mean boycotting most of the non-dairy chocolate products on the market, since the majority of cocoa beans in the world are sourced from the Ivory Coast.
I have a lot to say about that. Personally, I actually do try to buy fair trade chocolate as much as possible because, child labor or any kind of indentured servitude is wrong. I'm sure we can all agree with that. I just think, though, a question of how we approach the situation is different with problematic plant foods than with animal flesh or animal products. Because we want to eat chocolate. There's nothing inherently wrong with, whereas, as we discussed before, there's something inherently wrong with killing a cow to eat it. I don't know if I'm convinced that a boycott is what is going to liberate these people picking cocoa beans. I think, and it's I could be totally wrong here, but I suspect, and it's really sad, but that those regions are going to have to fix themselves. I'm not convinced that a boycott has that power to do so, because we want to, when we boycott animal products, we want all animal products to be eliminated. That being said, I know historically in the past that people have boycotted, for an example, cotton picked by slaves in America. I know that Abraham Lincoln, he asked leaders in Europe not to buy cotton from the South, and they listened, and his motivations admittedly were probably when the South was his enemy at the time, so if foreign leaders aren't buying cotton, it weakens them. Although I've read anyway that he also had motivations to not support slavery, and other private factories in Europe, in Britain at the time, actually stopped buying cotton as well, and that, I can't remember, it was a while ago, but somehow that helped contribute to a culture, maybe, or an economy of using products that were produced by slaves. But that's one example. It's just so tough when it's on the other side of the world, and it's so much corruption in their governments, and it's it seems almost impossible for the consumer, just the average person, to end all this corruption. And that's what I have to say about that.
For sure, yeah, well said. I think my angle too is it can be dangerous to actually oversimplify some of those issues. For example, the Peruvian quinoa issue, where people were saying, "Oh, buying quinoa is actually making it too expensive to, for these farmers to eat their own quinoa." And yet there was all the research done on it, and I've talked about this in my video, 12 Ways Vegans Are Ruining the World, or whatever it was called. I talked about the study on this, and they found that it has done nothing but enrich the local population of, and that's different because there's not necessarily slavery involved, and I think we should it's one more thing that we should do is to make sure we have that fair trade supply chain and not be giving our money to these farmers that are keeping slaves, which is horrible, and I think that goes without saying. But I would say, yeah, there's crop deaths that are animals, and there's crop deaths and crop exploitation of humans as well. But I think that's, we'll keep it crop deaths just for this discussion of animals, now that we've talked about, unless Nick, go for it.
Well, look, I certainly don't want to say anything to say that I'm, that the child slave labor is anyway morally acceptable, and certainly is exploitative. But when you buy chocolate, it's not clear that came from a child slave. Whereas when you buy an animal product, you know where that came from. You know it came from that exploitative industry. And I'll just bring up that that point that Cosmic Skeptic brought up also, which is that people are generally people are always going to be against child slave labor, but they're not going to be against exploitation of non-human animals. And so I think that that has to make that issue more front and center, because there is no one fighting for it, and because when something is neglected, it becomes far worse. Like if you neglect a festering wound, you're going to lose your leg. Child slave labor is not the festering wound, because people don't ignore it. They do ignore the animal, the animal cause, by that thought experiment that Cosmic Skeptic made about asking 100 people. So yeah, no, we certainly should avoid it. The same way we should avoid buying products that might be killing animals for crop farming if we can. But I don't put it on the same level.
Got it. I will say there would be an argument, totally different topic here, but you could make the argument that, yeah, everybody cares about, or everybody would be against slavery, but they haven't, if they were all actively out there advocating being activists about it, then there probably could be less. Seb, do you have anything to say about this? I haven't heard from you in a while. I don't want to silence you.
The only thing, I've actually watched a documentary about it. I don't remember the name anymore. And there is about the whole child slave trade industry as well in South Africa, in Africa in general, actually, but especially on when it comes to the chocolate industry, the cacao bean industry. And although Tofu mentioned that this could be something that they're going to have to sort out themselves, these companies are not like local companies. They are multi-billion industries that are based there. So it's not like, obviously there are like local involved in it, but I think we should care about this, because we do have, by the way, I'm not saying you said we shouldn't care, but I think we can have an impact as people who are on the other side of the world by boycotting, or at least like joining any type of protest that could take place against it, or sign a petition or whatever. I think Nestle recently said they can't confirm that their chocolates don't involve child slavery.
That's a yes.
Like, it's 2019 and you can't confirm you're not using child slaves.
They probably have data on every person's chocolate consumption here, and they can't figure out if they're using child slaves.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, I didn't realize they said that. I thought usually these companies at least make an effort to, even if they do, pay a very small amount, that at least they're providing something for people that might have nothing if they didn't give them a job. So I'm surprised they actually admitted that. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I want to say, no, go for it. Go
ahead.
I was just going to say these 3 questions are going to be the last questions, so we'll wrap it up relatively soon. But keep going, man.
That was it. It was actually a really eye-opening documentary. If I find the documentary somehow, I will share it here later on. But I think it's a really important one, because it's also not a underpaid issue. It's literally slavery issue. Like, children are kidnapped and then they're on farms. So it's as messed up as it could be.
Yeah,
and if we can miss a chocolate and then grab another one that doesn't involve slavery, then you should miss that one, skip that one chocolate.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah. I would say if you can do it, absolutely fair trade. Go for it all the way.
Yeah.
And then moving back onto crop deaths in general, it just makes me think about this. The biggest point of all of this is that usually when crop deaths are brought up, in my opinion, it's an appeal to futility for people that eat meat. They're saying that I can't prevent all deaths, vegans can't prevent all deaths, so why don't I just keep paying people to kill animals intentionally, including everything? And I hope we can all agree that that's just not a good logical response, because just because something is always going to have a negative impact doesn't mean that you can keep having having a large amount of negative impacts on purpose. It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, so this one's a bit complicated, and I don't know if I should try this, but I guess why not? Little fun math problem for Nick here, I think, from at Castor Troy. You are a firefighter entering a burning building. There are 2 rooms. First room, which is easily accessible, has 20 people which you can save. The second room down the hallway has 1 person, but it is more difficult. So difficult that you may risk saving the 20 if you save the 1. Pragmatically speaking, would it be better to save the 1 person and risk letting the 20 die, or do you save the 20 and try to save 1? I thought that would have something to do with crop deaths. I think he's talking about the crop death ethical dilemma earlier. So if you can tie it into crop deaths too, that'd be great.
Well, unfortunately, the way he formulated the question wasn't really perfect, because in a burning building scenario, which is similar to like a Sophie's Choice situation, or a situation like a lifeboat ethic question, if you do nothing, then everyone dies. So anyone that you allow to die, anyone that you save would have died had you not tried to save them. So it doesn't really have that sort of the same sort of deontological. It's not really a deontological question. So certainly you should try to do whatever will save the most lives, more lives than less lives. But it's hard to even say that it's necessarily a positive rights obligation to save any lives. Certainly, you maybe in a case where you don't have to take a risk, that would be an obligation. But the only time that you're actually have an obligation to take a risk with your own life to save someone is when you're the reason why they were in that situation to begin with. So I don't really think it actually really maps onto the crop death situation very well, but maybe I don't understand it.
Yeah, that's a pretty complicated one. Thanks for the question, but I think we're going to move on here. We're going to have Corky go for it. Ask your question in 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so my question is, are vegans obligated to reduce their consumption of basically all food to limit deaths, like crop deaths? And so, like, for example, should we limit ourselves to like 1,800 calories? Should we even go lower? Like, should we even be focusing on like maximizing our own health? Like, is there a point where we should actually start sacrificing, but not too much, And should we so another thing is like athletic vegans, is that like completely bad? Is that like unethical for there to be like people who take part in athletics and like consume like much more calories just for the sake of performing athletics? Like, I think sometimes I think there's like even health problems associated with some of the athletic things, like, so it's not even necessarily entirely healthy.
Cool. Yeah, I think we got it. I appreciate the question, man. Good to hear from you too. Yeah, cool. So, does anybody want to hit that? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. I'm glad that this question was brought up. I think, like, to put it another way, we can look at this question as: should we focus on? Could we vegans boycott all crops that produce a lot of crop kills and exclusively eat the bare minimum foods that have like the least deaths involved? So let's just say, hypothetically, that's soybeans and wheat, and let's say we could live off that. Do we have an obligation to do that? I think, again, like, this is just my perspective on it. It goes back to the effectiveness of a boycott for things like this. I'm just not convinced that a boycott like this is going to work. Like, firstly, it sends the message to the people who are growing these foods that it's not clear inherently that the problem is crop deaths and we're just boycotting it. But even if we could like organize and say, okay, these fruits and vegetables, we're boycotting them because they produce too many crop deaths, and make that known. I think the solution, rather than boycotting, because this is a serious hit on quality of life, and I believe we as humans, we also have inherent value, and we also have a natural right to a certain degree of enjoyability in our lives. And I would say the solution, rather than a boycott, would be, frankly, I think a lot of solutions for veganism invest in technologies.
Stand-in technology? Yeah, sorry, you blanked out.
Yeah. Yeah, just the solution is technologies. And so I'm not I don't find a boycott for this situation, like crop deaths, to be frankly appealing, or also just the most effective. I think we should be investing our time and energy into new technologies.
Got it. Cool. So Seb, I feel like you probably have something to say about this. Should you be doing fasts even potentially to be saving animal crop deaths?
No, I think because then it could go as like if once you go down that road, it could literally be stretched to like, oh, do you really want to go to see your friend now? Because then you are like burning extra calories, and then you're gonna need to eat more food, and therefore cause more like environmental damage and crop deaths. I think that's just far fetched.
Yeah, this is all handed over to Nick in a second, but my answer right away is this is I think it's really valid when you say, should you be over consuming calories or should you be making an extra effort to not over consume calories? Because, for example, vegans can slam down oil and eat a ton of calories, and my guess would be that, that's a concentration of a larger amount of animals or a larger amount of plants that would have an effect on a larger amount of animals. And then another huge one is just reducing food waste. I mean, nearly a third of the food is wasted in the U.S., and if we can just prevent that, then you're preventing that crop deaths. You can just lower the amount of, still be eating the same amount of food, but lowering the amount of food that you are consuming as a person, that you are requiring as a person through lower waste.
Hey,
Nick? Yeah?
Sorry to interrupt. I've got to get going.
Okay, yeah, I was about to wrap it up right now. I was going to take one more question, but you can just pop out. No problem with you popping out. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much. Great points.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'll just say one sentence. To anyone who ever brings up the crop deaths thing as an argument to not go vegan, I would just say, go look at a factory farm, and then go look at a field of wheat, and tell me which one's worse. And that's all I have to say.
All right, thanks so much. Talk
Thanks
to you
for having
soon.
me on.
Okay, bye. Nick, do you have any points on the calorie thing, or should I take the last question?
Yeah, I do have a quick point about it. And that's something that Tofu just said. I mean, that is true. I mean, the animals in factory farms, I mean, they live their entire lives in bondage as opposed to the animals in wheat fields. But I also want to say something, so I think there is a big contrast there. But kind of piggybacking on what you and Seb said, I think it's probably, it certainly is immoral to overconsume for the reasons why you guys stated. But I think it's also worth considering just to make sure that we're, consistent with applying it to obviously the human case. I mean, you could use the same argument to say that it was unethical to use your car to drive to the theater because you don't need to drive to the theater, and every time you drive you run the risk of running over somebody. I mean, you could take this to a level where you have no more entertainment in society. You have nothing because anything you do could you could minimize and produce and stop those deaths. So
Yeah.
So I think you have to consider those extremes when you're considering something like this. Yeah.
I would also add it. Yeah, it's to the like barrier of entry to veganism. If veganism also becomes closely tied to eating 1,500 calories a day or eating the bare minimum amount of calories a day, like that's gonna be, people love to eat. Like that would be enough for people to just keep eating all the animals. All right. So our last question, which was not specified, is from Lizzie. Lizzie, I'm assuming you're ready. I'm gonna let you go in 3, 2, 1, and go. Lizzie is live. Seems like your mic might be muted on your own end, so feel free to unmute your mic, and then we'll be good to go. Okay, go for it. Lizzie. There you go. Yep, go for it.
Okay, so Nick has mentioned at various moments that what is of moral salience in a scenario where both categories of deaths are intentional is the using of the animal for food. My question would be, from the perspective of the animal, what is morally significant about whether it is killed to be eaten or killed as a result of plant agriculture? And why is a distinction like that that only we can conceptualize worth making?
All right, thank you very much. Nick, you ready for it?
Lizzie, I'm surprised you didn't ask the harder question. This is actually the easier question. It's not so much an issue of what the animal cares about more versus less. It's the same, like, in just the same way with the standard trolley dilemma, where you're murdering someone to save five people, versus letting the five people die. Those people probably don't care one way or another. There are differences in terms of the moral weight of our actions, depending on our intentions behind those actions. It's really about our intentions really do matter, because it's ultimately our decisions that we're making. The question I thought you were going to ask is the one about whether it's morally acceptable to support a farm where the farmer shoots the animals or poisons the animals to protect their crops, sort of a self-defense situation, because this actually is more problematic for the doctrine of double effect. But I mean, that's a huge long quagmire that maybe we can talk about later, because it's probably isn't time to go over that now. But I think that's a more difficult question. But I still think that that there is a distinction, because you're not using those animals you're shooting or poisoning, and if you're defending your crops, and if those animals didn't exist, you would still be able to raise your crops. So that's what I would answer if you had asked that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective, and sort of from an empathy of the animal. Of, let's say you are an animal, or heck, let's just change this entirely. Let's say that China has somehow, through our debt, gotten half of the United States, and the United States is in total economic collapse, and you live on the border, and you go across the border every day to steal some crops, and they end up shooting you. Like, would you like, if you die from that way versus somehow people being cannibals, like, a human isn't really going to care, at least on a human level. Somebody who can and I would say an animal too isn't going to care whether they were killed one way or killed the other way. Like, whether you were killed on purpose or killed on accident, you were still killed, and you're still killed at a certain time. But I would argue, oh man, this is complicated. I'm kind of trying to gather my thoughts here, but that there's a slippery slope that I see happen in practical human behavior all the time, where even if you were to grant that it is ethically equal or ethically better to eat that one cow, for example, that one grass-fed cow, than the crops with the crop deaths, which I don't ascribe to, you just all of a sudden you're eating animals. Like, animals are part of your diet, and I've like, for example, even reducitarians, like, every reducitarian I know is eating meat every single time I meet up with them, every single time I see them, pretty much. And so all of a sudden you're eating all the animals, and that's probably sounds like a little bit of a cop-out, but do you
look? There's a lot of suffering in the world. Millions of people suffer every day. Millions of non-humans suffer every day. We can't devote our lives to every single one of them. We just don't have the time. So we have to pick and choose. And the best way to pick and choose is who are we directly responsible for endangering. And those are the times where we have to be most cognizant of the other individuals of value. So I guess that's what I would say there. I mean, there's a difference between collateral damage and intentionally targeting someone, is what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, like, for closing statements of this, unless Lizzie can really concisely say her response, because she doesn't seem like she was satisfied, closing statements would be, we need to study this more. We need to be, think somehow maybe somebody can do a crop death comparison full life cycle for different crops, and see what could happen, and do research into methods for reducing these crop deaths. Like, again, that drone, like, what is the efficacy of those drones, which I assume that would be highly ethical, or highly efficacious, highly effective, and thinking of just creative out of the box solutions, technology solutions. For example, these little farm bots might do an amazing job at just picking weeds instead of spraying with pesticides. That could be, the future of vegan farming. All right, so thank you so much for coming on. Seb, do you have any final thing to say? I feel like we haven't let you talk, or you haven't talked in a while. So
no, all good.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time. This went a little longer than I thought it would, so I appreciate you for sitting there, this whole time, even though you're in Bali, when you could just run outside probably into the amazing stuff. And here I am in Iowa, where it gets dark at 4, and yeah, nothing's great. So thanks so much, Nick. Thanks so much, Seb, and of course, Tofu Goddess is gone, but thanks to her, future reference.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for staying, listening, asking questions, and that's it. So feel free to subscribe to Mike the Vegan too. Thank you so much. Again, we're over 1,000 subscribers now in like a week, which is so cool. Week and a half. So I appreciate it. Appreciate everyone here in Discord as well. And if you want to come be part of one of these next time, join the Discord server. It will be linked below, and you can be asking questions too and listening in real time. All right. Thanks for watching.